Alright, so I applied about 3 layers of white paint to the background and about 4 layers of paint to the relief. I left the background a little bit streaky and splotchy just because I'm going to put collage on top of that, so it doesn't really matter quite so much. So how you decide to decorate your relief obviously depends on what materials you have at home. If you have acrylic paint, you can definitely just paint in acrylic. You could also use something like a Sharpie, or you can use a felt tip pen to draw designs. You can use, I'm going to use some watercolors for the sake of this demo, and I'm also going to incorporate some collage. If you don't have paint or watercolors, but you would like to do something painterly, you can actually paint using food coloring if you have any food coloring in your cupboard. Or there is an American artist called David Hammonds who made a series of paintings using Kool-Aid. So even if you have something like that in your cupboard, you could potentially experiment sort of using pigments out of like everyday items that you have in your cupboard that aren't necessarily day-to-day necessities. So I'm just going to quickly show a quick demo. I thought it would be interesting to create sort of a wash, like an earthy wash over the urn, so it kind of has a kind of clay, feeling of clay. So I'm just gonna quickly give it like a little bit of a wash with some watercolor paint. And you can see, because of the sort of texture of the paper mache and the translucence of the wash, it sort of picks up a lot of the textures that we've created with the paper in a really interesting kind of way. So I just wanted to do a quick wash just to sort of give it a little bit of a pigment. If you feel like you want to sort of do some bolder, sort of flat acrylic colors, you're also welcome to do that. It all just depends on the overall look that you kind of want for your relief project. So I'm just laying this down just sort of as a base color and kind of just letting it sort of pool in areas. Just to kind of create like a really subtle wash, almost as if it was kind of carved out of some kind of stone. Alternatively, you could also do this with like a grey or a black if you wanted to give it sort of a marble texture. So I'm just going to quickly hit that with the hair dryer, which is, you know, a way that you can kind of cut out some time. And I kind of wanted to keep with the theme of sort of like ancient Greek urns. A lot of those ancient Greek urns were kind of painted in like black and brown. So I could even potentially take just a Sharpie if I want just flat black. And I can use that, for instance, to color in handles. Or if you want it to be, you could also do this in acrylic paint. But if you don't have any acrylic paint, you know, you can do this with a Sharpie. Just as sort of like a way to get a base color in there. And it's up to you. It kind of depends on what kind of project you're making. I think it's kind of interesting to keep this sort of scribbly texture, because it kind of relates the work to, in a contemporary way, kind of gives it this sketchy kind of feeling, almost as if it's relating to drawing as well as relief and sculpture, and it kind of makes it interesting and dynamic, I think. So I'm just going to do like a scribbly, something like that. And then I could even potentially use it to create like a pattern. Just be careful if your paint isn't completely dry, it might start to gum up the Sharpie. So yeah, I could use it to make sort of like a graphic pattern along the top. Obviously, like, this is just for the purpose of the demo, so it could be a little neater, or you could go in there with a little bit more detail, but it's just sort of like trying to give you an idea of how you can sort of decorate and incorporate color with your relief. Because remember those images that I showed you of Greek and Roman sculptures that were painted in like really vivid bright colors with all these really amazing patterns as well. So those are some things just to keep in mind. So yeah, that looks pretty cool. So I'm just gonna, I'll fill this part in a little bit later on. This is just to sort of give you guys just a general idea of something that you can do. So when it comes to the face, I think I kind of want to keep that fairly graphic as well. I might go over, rather than using the Sharpie, I might use, actually I'm just going to use the Sharpie. Or actually I have oh no, I don't have a Posca pen. So really I want you guys to get creative with whatever materials that you have at home. Because essentially that's how we're going to be working over the rest of the semester, is just trying to be really resourceful with what we already have. So I might go back in with the face and just add a few details, so maybe like highlight this part. Just to really sort of draw attention to the dimensionality of the nose. So I'm going to go in there and paint that. So still, you know, making it something that's kind of stylized, but it's interesting sort of like the combination of using watercolor with the Sharpie, I think is creating a really interesting relationship. Rather than just sort of making it this like homogeneous, kind of very samey sort of sculpture, it gives it something that's a bit more dynamic and interesting. For the eyes, I might just sort of do some kind of like very sort of basic kind of shape. Just some sort of working with the textures that I created. Working to sort of like carry in some of that sort of initial drawing that I made. And then maybe sort of something just very simple for the lip. Yeah, and so it's sort of an interesting face starting to emerge. If you like, you know, you can probably go back in and add a bit more detail. But yeah, just really sort of play around with your materials that you have available. And just sort of play around with what works in terms of like what you were thinking of with your initial design. Yeah, I think the watercolor is good too, because you can kind of play around with It can get quite opaque, but you can also achieve these really beautiful washes with it. And you can get these kind of really gestural lines as well, which is kind of cool. So something, if you don't have access to anything that you feel like you could really use to decorate your relief, another option is collage. And there's many different ways that you could go about incorporating collage with your relief. For this demo, I've cut a bunch of squares just of patterns that I found in magazines. And I thought it would be interesting to arrange them in the background. Like, it all depends on what's happening in your background. If it's like a nature scene, then you could potentially like cut out trees and cut out actual images that you wanted to collage together. But I thought it would be interesting, for the sake of this demo, to experiment with creating a decorative pattern, like a tile-like pattern in the background, by cutting out just squares from magazines that I had lying around, and then just kind of playing around with assembling the collage. And so obviously then I would glue these onto the background. So this is just an idea of how you can incorporate collage. You could also incorporate collage onto the relief section of your work. Another way that you could do it is potentially you could cut out certain colors, and instead of using them in a decorative way, you could potentially, similar to how we did with the paper mache, you could kind of layer them on top of each other to create collage in the background. Or if you wanted it to be a certain solid color, you could just sort of cut out specific colors and glue them down. So it's just sort of an alternative way, if you don't have access to acrylic paints or Sharpies or anything like that, that you can decorate your paper mache panel. Also, if you don't have white paint, you can use the final layer of your paper mache. Make sure it's just made out of white paper, and that's an easy way to kind of skip that process. So yeah, so this is just a really basic demo, just to kind of give you guys an idea of what kind of materials, how you can use your certain materials to decorate your relief. I really want you to think about color. It'd be really exciting to see you guys incorporate some collage. Yeah, and that is the end of this demo, and I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with.